First and foremost, I'd like to thank you for taking the time to scan through this video. Your time is precious and I hope not to waste it. Below are timestamps, assuming I figured out how to do that lead to the thoughts I've had for the betterment of the franchise, but I lack the technical skill to fully understand the scope of what I'm presenting or understanding of the limitations of the development team, who I owe a great thanks to for renewing my love for adventure and daydreaming. Furthermore, these are my muses and may not suit everyone's tastes. I ask for understanding in regards to the content. It is all out of interest in the potential of the franchise and comes from a place of respect and admiration. And I'd also like to apologize for my complete and utter lack of editing skills of any kind. Basically brand new to this, never done it before. And the static in the background of my mic. I couldn't get rid of it. For brevity's sake, I'll be skipping contextualizing the current and previous systems, and would like to avoid debating the pros and cons of them to focus on the future. I'll be containing this section to the potentially most influential changes I've thought of. Number 1. Crafting can only be done at a campsite once unlocked, or at a hub area such as a village or guild hall. Number 2. Campsites do not contain your entire inventory, but rather what you've allocated to that map's campsite or sites. Or alternatively, what you've unlocked via side quests to be allocated for you there. This could even be the potential for the campsites to be leveled up. So for example, Level 1 unlocks fast travel, either in total or only to the hunting grounds / area the camp is in. Level 2 unlocks healing when resting. Level 3 unlocks the ability to eat. Level 4 the ability to craft at said campsite. And maybe Level 5 would unlock more items than before or higher quantities would be available. Number 3. Items should be given value even if or when the hunter has no need for their primary use. Like in older entries, worms, dung, etc. Should be usable at the farm to multiply other items the hunter may want. Alternatively, they could be a marketplace, restricted to single player to avoid multiplayer completely breaking the economy or the game's pacing, where the player can sell or trade items they no longer need for items they may find use for. Number 4. Items received at the end of a quest should be able to be bid for or traded amongst those who participated in the quest. In the case of bidding, a tie could be broken by the arm wrestling minigame, if it ever comes back, which would also mean I'd never get anything. Number 5. Some items should have expiration dates. If you gather a plant or carve a monster's organ, it shouldn't last indefinitely in your inventory for the purpose of pushing the player to use the item in some way that permanently secures value for the player, such as turning herbs into potions, monster bits into weapons, armor, charms, cosmetics. This expiration could work either as X amount of seasons or X amount of quests. Things like honey should have no expiration, but only be available to farm or gather during a specific season. I have notes further on about seasons returning. We'll get there. Number 6, healing items be given proper use cases and diversity. For example, healing potentially works much faster when stationary or crouching, but the rate is reduced or halted while moving, requiring a sacrifice of movement for healing or vice versa. They also heal at a slower rate, such as a slow health regen. So for example, herbs heal at 1 HP per second for 60 seconds, maybe potions heal at 2.5 HP per second for 60 seconds, and mega potions heal at 5 HP per second for 30 seconds. Personally, I'd like the potion and mega potion to actually heal the same amount, but have variable rates, making the mega potion more valuable, but the potion still pretty useful to have around as well. But that's personal preference. Really, either way would be functional. Max Potion heals at 10 HP per second for 30 seconds. Ancient Potion heals at 10 HP per second and boosts stamina regen. And the Immunizer doubles healing rate for healing items for 60 seconds or doubles the timer for the healing. Life Powder insta-heals 25 HP plus 2.5 HP per second for 30 seconds. Dust of Life insta-heals 50 HP plus 2 HP per second for 30 seconds. Antidote cures poison. Herbal Medicine cures poison and prevents poison periodically, maybe for 60 seconds. Gourmet Fish heals 1 HP per second for 180 seconds. And potentially all healing items with rates could have their timer paused or significantly slowed when the player is moving to make them more valuable. A skill or two could even affect this, but for the fundamental function of it, I think the timer should always be ticking down. So if you use an item and you continue to fumble around, moving, fighting the monster, you're wasting your healing potential. And of course, the numbers I stated there a minute ago are just examples. I don't think they'd be functional numbers at all. They'd probably be pretty broken. Like, healing would be way easier than it is now if we use those numbers. um, Another note on life powders and similar items like that. They should have a range that is limited to the visual effect range it has, just like Vigor Wasps and other environmental healing items are. The amount of life powder carryable should also be increased to at least 5 to compensate for the decreased range, but preferably 10. Um, Another note on healing items and received damage should be balanced in a way that you do not feel foolish if you do not heal immediately, or that it is mandatory to heal immediately after receiving damage. One possible way is to make it that the healing item's effects last much longer, but do not activate while you are moving, as I've said earlier, requiring the player to pause, meaning they are losing damage, potentially becoming a target, or sacrificing other advantageous opportunities for the opportunity to recover a desired amount of health. A secondary benefit of the system is that it provides a pre-battle choice for healing. Does the player consume a precious potion before beginning an encounter in the event it's needed, possibly wasting it entirely, or wait until it is truly needed? And there are a few mechanics like this already in the games, so it wouldn't be brand new, so to speak. And while wide range is a skill and not an item, I do want to mention it here in this section. I believe it is one of the most broken skills the series has ever had. While I'm sure in earlier games its effects were overlooked due to limitations, I don't believe such design limitations are present anymore. Wide range would be better if it worked thusly. Wide range increases the range of items that affect teammates by X% per level of wide range skill, making something like Life Powder's visual and actual effect double in volume, for example. Because there are so many different iterations of this system across the franchise, it's really difficult for me to say, I want this. Because I've been surprised multiple times and wouldn't want to take away the opportunity to create something else interesting in this space. However, there are always lackluster components though, so maybe I could do a short video on this separately. What I will say is that I do believe fainting should reduce or should not reduce or remove the health, stamina, or food skills received from eating. While not as frustrating in later titles, fainting in a quest in older games essentially meant running the risk of being one-shot by monsters without having the maximum available health. One-shots are never fun if they do not give the player a considerable warning. I can't think of a single time playing just about any game, not just Monster Hunter, where getting one shot by an enemy felt like an enjoyable part of the mechanics. So while I have little room to speak on the technical side of the UI, I can say as an end user that the UI and even some controller functions were better handled in previous titles, particularly for you with the 3DS screen. The UI was clean, clear, easy to navigate, fit the style of the world, and it was consistent across the game. However, in World Onward, this has changed. Some additions are welcome, but not perfect, and others feel like a step backwards. One thing I greatly miss is a clear and simple way to bring up the gestures, callouts, and chat functions. While technically you can still quickly do so with the new shortcut menu, it occupies more of the screen, is far clumsier, and at least in Rise cannot be operated by muscle memory. Not the shortcut menu, but the regular menu to do so. The reason why I don't like the shortcut menu so much is because you gotta waste potential slots for other items or other things you might want to use. If you're like me and you play a bunch of different weapons and have different loadouts, it's really annoying to rebind everything 1,000 times. But I guess you only have to do it one time. So that's a personal nitpick. Items and UI should be color-coded and designed to be as clear and easy to navigate as possible, with a secondary goal of adherence to the world stylization. Now, in Rise, they had mentioned that they were going to start doing some of this, and I was really excited to see that change until the game came out, and realized that all they really did was change a few, symbols and didn't really color code anything at all. So it wasn't particularly useful. Just made more confusion for people returning to older games to try them out, I think. While not mission critical per se, I'd love to see more customization options for the HUD, placement of the map, weapon info, health and stamina bar, etc. That's something I think Rise, compared to World, did a better job with. You can turn basically everything on the HUD off, but you can't arbitrarily pick things and put them where you want on the screen, which is a shame because I have an issue with weapons like the hunting horn where I can't see a damn thing on the screen because there's so much junk in the way. And you also can't see the chat logs if you want to turn off the auto shouts from your teammates. So then you lose all the chat logs, which is frustrating. Um, the UI should never block the player's view of the monster or the action on the screen. That is something, again, that the hunting horn is really bad about in Rise, in my opinion. Some weapons, don't require their weapon info bar at all to understand their status, but some do, so that should be addressed. Say like the longsword or the dual blades, you kind of know when you're powered up or leveled up, and you can use their special moves and states. The Insectglaive also used to have something like that, although now I don't believe it does. I haven't used it a whole lot in Rise, but I don't remember it having that character glow from leveling up all the way. Whatever you call them, the powders. Um, and a lot of weapons really, really need that little status info for the weapon, which I don't have a problem with needing it. But if it can be communicated natively through the game environment and animations, then it should be done so. And it's fine also to have a secondary communication for these things as long as it can be toggled on and off or placed on the screen where it feels appropriate for the player. Um, and then I have a few other key points, well, really two, but three and four are personal things that I really, really hope they bring back. So number one is they gotta bring back the stunned stars. Not only are they a simple signal understood around the world, but they also dwindle in number as you rotate your stick to show you how much longer you will be stunned for. This was genius and perfect design for this. Number two is that they should bring back the max flashing text so you know your health and stamina is maxed out. Yeah, we don't really need this, but it makes me feel good, and I thought it was a good design. Maybe someone could give me a counter argument for why that's not needed. Uh, Personal opinion, though, for number three, is that the camera needs to be pulled back or better adjusted so that monsters fit on the screen while fighting. I'm personally really tired of feeling like I'm shoving the camera into the dirt so I can see a third of the monster to figure out what my next action should be. The camera isn't horrible. It's great compared to a lot of other games I've played, but it needs to be pulled back so the player and the monster and the incoming attack can be seen. Now, I know a lot of people would disagree with this. I've heard a lot of people say, no, 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 if you did that, you would lose the scale of the monster and the impact of the fight, and you wouldn't feel as close to the action. Um, but I disagree. I don't think that's true because I've played a lot of games with a dynamic camera that does pull away from the action so you can see more clearly what's going on. And my sense of scale is not diminished by that. It does make it feel more cinematic, which would be a better experience for someone, watching, sitting on the couch next to you, per se. But um, I think it's fine so long as it's, not pulled back super dramatically. Like a good example would be Dalamadur from 4U. I hated Dalamadur because I could never see what the hell is going on because it's such a big monster and you're looking around all over the place, especially in the 3DS, the regular one. The camera is not particularly fun to use, and it was just difficult to tell what was going on. But that's also a good example where if you pulled the camera too far back, it would be probably a miserable experience because you wouldn't be able to see your own character because Dalamadur is so big, put it simply. So there's got to be a balance there. Maybe it scales to only one part of the body, the part you're targeting or something. Um, but it's not a huge issue, but it can be a big issue for the larger monsters. I generally have an issue with it with monsters that stand much higher than the player character. Something like Diablos is kind of in that mid-range where most of the time he fits well in the camera, but sometimes I can't quite see every part of him, and specifically melee weapons, right? And that can be frustrating when I know his attack patterns really well, but some part of him was off screen, so I didn't see what he was doing. And number 4 is a redesign of the gem/slot symbols specifically to be much more intuitive and understandable. This is something I think could just use a lot of love. It could be color coded and have more easily identifiable logos or symbols. Currently, the gem logo thing is very confusing. Um, for those that don't know, I often actually play Monster Hunter with my mom. She loves the series too. She just started getting into video gaming maybe a year or two ago, and she loves Monster Hunter. But this is something she still has no comprehension of because it's very obtuse to a new player, and it's difficult to explain. And well, specifically, it's difficult to explain over the phone or through like a Discord call. If I was there in person, it'd probably be easier. Um, but yeah, it's just could use a little bit of love, something simpler. Even just putting a number in for the slot that says level 3 or level 1, level 2 in that little logo, so okay, it can go up to level 3 or it can go up to level 2 or whatever. That would be a good enough solution in my opinion. And lastly, these are just little things that kind of go into my personal preferences, but also into what I really, really, really want Monster Hunter start steering towards after having lots of experiences in older games. But anything like a glowing interactable or a button prompt that pops up, those types of things need to be toggleable. I love that they're there for people to get used to the game, to understand things, but you know, you know what you can and can't interact with for the most part in the modern games. Everything looks identical that can be interacted with just about. It stands out pretty well. I also don't need it to grow lime green and have a button prompt over it to tell me what button to press. Maybe the first time that's great. But, again, it just needs to be a toggleable option. If you go back to the older games, they didn't have unified uh, gathering spots. So sometimes you'd have to guess, go, oh, that looks like a mushroom. I think I can pick that up, and you would be right if it was indeed a gatherable mushroom. That was fun. I liked that. I liked feeling like it was part of the world, and I knew through experience what I could and couldn't gather and use. That was a good part of it. And while that's not necessarily lost, it does really break my immersion and pulls me out of the experience when I walk by a plant and it starts growing lime green, telling me to pick it up. And then this is a preference, I suppose, but I really think it's a demand from Capcom. So I'm going to say that I demand that the map pop up when you hold down your item select button to return, or at least be a toggleable option. I can't tell you how many times I go to do that and the map doesn't pop up and I get confused and then I have to go, oh yeah, I got to press the start key or whatever, the minus key I think it is now, and it's really yeah, it's just a dumb thing that I can't get used to, and I just demand that comes back. All right, quests and arena. This is only page 6 of my 30-page script, and this is the longest section. I actually just recorded this whole thing a minute ago, and I didn't notice that I hit the space bar on accident halfway through, and only got about a third of the recording done. So here we go again. Monster Hunter's genre has indeed changed. It is now much closer to the tempo, design, and pacing of a boss rush. While I do enjoy that genre as well, I prefer the hunting experience like many others. The groundwork for both modes of play exists in the series already, and there's plenty of room for both styles to exist side by side in the same game, as they have since the series' conception. I propose that quests, hunting, if possible, be made to be in more of an open world style format, with monsters having seasons and migration patterns. Monster Hunter Dose, but better. This would give the developers a much needed chance to breathe even more life, creativity, and detail into the monsters and their behaviors. The secondary thought I had in relation to that, although it's one I'm even against, is that the idea that slaying too many of one type of monster in an area could upset the balance of nature there and cause a shift in the ecosystem, causing predators to find new hunting grounds or different species to populate it for a time, until the ecosystem has rebounded or the player does something to help it do so. The logistics and background programs for something like this are probably immense and potentially not worth the outcome, especially if it was an online service with thousands of players interacting with this world. Um, However, this would give the player a sense of urgency to take down elder dragons when they appear. Something like that would be, a nice change to see. To go along with the open world format, fast traveling to a hunting area once a campsite is unlocked should require time, changing when the hunt has begun or progressed. So if you leave your village or town in the morning, maybe you get there in the afternoon, or you get there at night, or you get there in the morning of the next day. Um, and a third and equally stomach churning thought I've had that I'm sure everyone will hate me for, but I really, really enjoy this, is some dreaded escort missions where you're tasked with keeping monsters away from merchants, palicos hauling things, or your captured and dead monsters and their bits while they're being taken to a safe place where they can be safely transported back to your hub area. As well as inventory Tetris for monster bits. That's something I would personally love, but I would be completely understanding if that never appeared in the series. I could see that also being quite frustrating. Um, Anyways, I would also like to see the return and improvement of the paintball system. For example, only the monsters selected for your quest or presented in the expedition quest info will have tracks that will appear. Doesn't mean that other monsters won't be in the area, just means that you won't be able to find their tracks because you don't have a ticket, quote unquote, to hunt that monster. Uh, these tracks should point you in the general direction of the monster. Once found, you can paintball the monster. The paint will leave bright stains around the map or giving off a strong smell giving you the direction towards the monster. This would mean fast traveling is risky because you will momentarily lose track of the monster's location because you'll essentially be resetting your compass location or your location from the monster relative to your compass bearing. Now that we have Palamutes and Palicos, you could also make it so the paintballs have a fragrance they like or can follow well, as I believe is the case in older games, meaning they could give you gestures or text boxes to indicate direction after paintballing the monster. I mean, come on, who doesn't want to see their Palamute do like the pointing gesture to show you what direction to go? This would be, also really interesting for specific monsters such as Mitsusune, who is constantly taking bubble baths, so you would always have to paintball them and you'd lose track of where they are and stuff. It'd be kind of fun or frustrating. Fun for me. Anyways, and just to be clear, uh, when I'm talking about this new paintball system, I don't mean that once you paintball them, they show up on your map and you know their exact location. I never want you to ever know the exact location of any monster or item on the map. What I want to happen is for the compass to be useful, or have a compass implemented. And so what it would do is once you gather tracks or you see tracks visually, hopefully they're visually indicating what direction to go. But if they're not, you can look at your compass bearing afterwards, and the compass bearing will have a glow on the bearing you should be heading towards to go find the monster. And then once you paintball them, maybe that glow stays there for much longer. It could even have a timer on the compass bearing showing you how long you have left before you got to repaint them. And I guess we don't really need a timer, but that would be nice. Long story short, you get a compass bearing showing the direction to go, not a exact pinpoint location. And for cases where they're above or below you, you could just have the compass highlight all directions at one time or something. That would be a way of doing it. I'd also like to see carding systems changed in some quests as well. Maybe have the amount of carts linked to the amount or level of the camps in that area. Maybe have specific quests where everyone gets one cart only, and when you faint, you're stuck in a spectator mode until the quest finishes. I'll talk about the spectator mode soon. Maybe have carting result in the player losing time at camp until their health and stamina recharge to a point the player is comfortable to return to the hunt. Maybe having the player carted all the way back to town or to a separate region where the camp has been leveled up enough to handle triage, or maybe having carting result in losing time on the clock. While I had mentioned the whole world being open world earlier, I also want to clarify before moving on to the next point that I believe the developers have various options available to them depending on the situation. And the two that I could think of were these. So number one, they could have a completely open world map that you can traverse and go anywhere. This is the most technically challenging and would require a lot of sacrifices. Most notably, the time limit would be a problem for many quests without special consideration. It'd basically be a nightmare to handle timed quests unless they do it in very specific ways. And then number two, which is what I would prefer, is to have multiple large maps about the size of Rise's maps, or maybe worlds, that are all connected in a similar way as the old game's map sections were. This could allow them to have all sorts of map conditions and states, such as having unstable locations run through a random number generator to alter the location depending on the situation, animal density, monster, variety, all that. For instance, if an Elder Dragon had gone through the area, or if all the Kelbi had been slaughtered by a group of hunters. These areas would be able to offer more detail and more of a focused experience than a complete open world design, and I really want this. I believe that this would be the best way to go. And I could be wrong on the offering more detail and more of a focused experience, but I do believe that is true. And just in case anyone's a little confused by what I'm saying with this type of map design, I want a relatively large Rise-sized map that is connected through a short loading screen to another relatively large Rise-style map. So once you go through that, you're in a completely new zone. You could also have the potential where you could repel or fight off a monster, and it could retreat to another map or another zone, and you have to follow it into that area to continue the hunt. That would be especially exciting for monsters that are Elder Dragons or the super, endgame baddie monsters. That'd be really fun. I also believe capture quests and capturing a monster deserve some more depth, such as the previously mentioned escort to campsite, but I haven't really completed my thoughts on this, so I kind of want to save it for now, unfortunately. But I just feel like capturing monsters is quite easy in the new games, and it doesn't really feel rewarding to do so. I'm stuck between deciding if it's easier to capture a monster or if it's easier to kill a monster. It just kind of feels like it depends on the situation, which is fine. That's probably how it should be, but in most cases, I feel like capturing in itself is far too easy, which is, I think, part of the reason why in Rise there was almost no capture quests, because I think the developers knew that it was too easy to do. It wasn't particularly exciting gameplay in the current iteration of the series. All right, the arena. So the arena needs a spectator mode. As I mentioned before, spectator mode should specifically be designed for the arena mode. You could have it be implemented in a way that allows you to have the character be placed in a fixed position to see the whole arena, or have it tail behind one of the players, and then you could swap behind them, or you could have it set up so that it's like walking around the arena, as you're controlling your character, looking at things. I don't know. Either way would be good. But it's got to have a spectator mode. It would improve the whole boss rush genre bits significantly and improve the arena significantly, especially if they ever bring back large player hubs again. So you have, 15, 16 people in there. You could have somebody running the arena and everybody's just watching their arena run to see how it goes. The spectator mode, again, could also be very, very useful for the hunting mode. I would love to see that implemented in at least some quests, if not all. And so my next point there is that monsters should be unlocked to fight in the arena by capturing them, or maybe by ranking up within the arena itself. So I think the arena should have its own rank up system, kind of like Hunter rank, but you should have an arena rank. And the arena should also have 2 or 3 distinct styles of play within it. You should have the preset, which is what we have now, where the monster and the loadout options are preset. Free, where the monsters are set, but the equipment can be chosen freely. We also have this now, but they're not given through the Arena Quest Giver, they're given through the regular quest counter. And then you should also have random, where it randomly selects builds that are viable please, and given and random monsters are selected. Then there should potentially maybe be a return of the PvP mode. I would like this, but I don't know how they would implement it exactly. It'd be cool to have something, though. I also think the arena mode should also be restrained to specialized arena maps and not available outside of this game mode. I have an extreme bias against World, Iceborne, and Monster Hunter Rise's arena quests that are set outside the arena and regular quests that are set in the arena. It really drives me insane. It blurs the lines too much between the arena and the regular hunting. Uh, Arenas should be a great place for hunters to challenge themselves and each other in various forms of competition. It could even be a great setting for story, etc., for those who want to enjoy the boss rush genre over the hunting genre. So you could fit a whole secondary story or primary story into the arena and a story into the hunting. That would be amazing. Having your character build his reputation and his fame up and follow a storyline through the arena, and then you also have him going out hunting and interacting with the villagers and having the story unfold with the villagers through your hunting escapades. It'd be awesome. Uh, those who want to enjoy the boss genre over the hunting genre, that would also be a really great thing for them to have, I believe. This might require the developers to divorce these modes from each other and separate them into different games, but I don't believe you need to do that. Even if you have to shorten the stories or shorten the overall experience of one mode over the other, having both in the same game, I think, would make the game an overall stronger product. Because I'm sure that I'm not the only one that completely forgets entirely about the arena until I've already beaten the entire game. And then I go, oh yeah, the arena, I should go back and do that. I know a few players that they always do the arena stuff first because they don't have to make anything and they can just go and do the presets and enjoy the experience. But very, very few people I feel like do that. And I also believe it is entirely possible to roughly balance the two modes so a player can advance in the game via the arena or hunting, so that if you were to choose one path or the other, you could gradually progress your character in some way that is meaningful, rather than right now where the arena, you get some cool stuff, but you don't get enough to justify doing only the arena over hunting, outside of the key quests. So what I'm meaning is do primarily arena and then just do key quests. There's not any real reason to do that currently, and I actually don't think that would be a viable way to go through the game. It'd be fun to see someone do a challenge doing that, though. Um, and yeah, that's more or less all I have for this section. But I guess the last thing I could say about the arena is that the awards could be handled differently from the regular quests and the hunting. So a way to do it would be, well, when you hunt a monster, you get to carve it, and you could take back whatever you could carve from the monster in your inventory. That'd be a great way of doing it, especially if you have the mechanic where you have to take things back to the camp or take things back to your hub area. Then, it's like, oh, well, you could get any part of the monster you need, but you got to be able to carry it. But in the arena, it could be that you get a lottery system. You beat the monster, but you don't get to choose what you get from the monster. It's up to whoever's running the arena. They just give you pieces based on how well you did. And so then the rarity of those monster parts come into play more often. And that would be something exciting. It would also give you a really good reason to get really good times killing a monster, because it would mean you could get a higher rarity drop from that monster. That's a way to do it. Alright, Monster AI. So I admittedly wrote more for this section than I probably have any right to, considering I have a complete lack of technical knowledge or experience for these things. So the only way I can describe or discuss this is through my own personal experiences. Um, so, number one, I think the monsters need improved tracking of the player to keep up with the player's improved control over their own character. This doesn't mean faster. I don't want twitch reflex moves for every monster. I mean, some monsters could have that. That would be enjoyable for some. Number two would be improved monster states, i.e. more dynamic differences in the quote-unquote scared, rage, player undetected, tired, hungry, and player detected states. A lot of monsters have some kind of version of these based on their animations or situations, but it would be cool to have more improvements and more dynamic differences in them. I would want to see the addition of a defending location or defending a monster state. Something like that would be amazing to improve Rathian and Rathalos, because they already kind of do this through their coding, I believe. Tracking in a hunting state, that would be really cool, especially something like Deviljho just following the hunter around. Maybe a hiding state for some monsters that don't want to be bothered. Um, and something I think we need is a targeting or a targeted state that lets the players know they have the monster's focus. I don't think all monsters should have this, but some or a majority should. We've had iterations of this for specific monsters in previous games, and I loved it when it was in those games. I was like, oh, this is fantastic. Why isn't this on every monster? So I just really want a improved version of that that's more seamless to be implemented. All right, number 3 is massively improved hitboxes. So I'm okay with chip damage. I really am. I'm not crying about it. I swear. I've already dried my eyes many times, so I'm not crying anymore about it. But there is no excuse for the portion of a monster not involved in its attack to deal full or significant damage to the player. If the monster's trying to bite me and its back or back leg touches me, I shouldn't take tons of damage. A little bit's okay, but come on. Admittedly, this is a really minor issue, and it's not nearly as bad of an issue in the more recent games in the series, but it does make me feel cheated, and it's very frustrating. Um, it's yeah, it's just a silly thing that I personally have a gripe about, I suppose. Number 4, monsters should use the same physics-based calculations for damage, but amplified by their actual size, meaning a slightly smaller monster deals less damage and a slightly larger monster will deal more on top of their attack's base damage. I really want this. I know we have a simulated physics, that we call motion value and stuff for attacks. I would love this to be used for the monsters as well, because I don't believe it is. Um, that would be a really cool thing to implement. And I do have a comment later on about armor that I personally would like, but since I've very, very, very rarely encountered games that use an armor system like this, it must just be either unstandard or unsatisfying in some regards for the vast majority of players. So um, I'll mention it near the end of this video, I believe. And then number 5, small monsters need much more polish to be fun to fight and enjoyable to interact with, rather than a moving punching bag or a minor annoyance that they usually are in most entries. A final note here too with AI, because I didn't know where else to put this, is that I would love to see some kind of acknowledgement of the Monster Hunter universe's lore with poachers and hunters that don't quite have the rights to hunt in an area. Not necessarily that you're going out there and slashing them and whacking them with your weapons, because the game's not really designed for that kind of combat, but some kind of interaction with them would be interesting. It would be cool to have something put into the game that goes along with like the slay small monsters quest. Like maybe it's a capture poacher or identify poachers in an area kind of thing. So you got to track them and find them and then notify the guild. That would be really cool. Okay, on to the section that will have every single person in the community out to strangle me. So we currently have 14 weapons, and each previously was designed with a playstyle or role in mind. However, there is some significant balancing needed, I believe modern technology and developer skill can put in place. When I say balancing, I do not mean in terms of damage or time to kill, mostly. This is already adequate and equal across the board of the 14 weapons, provided you have adequate skill with said weapon's moveset, or you're using that game's mechanics to its fullest, for the most part. Rather, what I mean to say is that we should also have the weapons perform some number of roles more effectively than others depending on build choices, as well as more refined player control over the move sets, and of course a distinct use for each move in a move set. There arguably is, however, there are many moves that have lost their utility or due to animations, damage, etc. have little to no utility but are leftovers from previous entries in games where they did have utility. A good example in Rise would be smacking your teammate up in the air so they can do an aerial attack. That is completely worthless in Rise, but you can still do it. Or another good example would be, I don't know, some minor attacks in certain move sets where pretty much everybody, especially specifically Gunlance, will say, "Oh, never do this combo because it's slower, does the same amount of damage as a faster combo, or it does less damage than the other combo. Just don't use it." And so the entirety of the user base will ignore that combination, and it's basically a dead combo path or a dead end in that weapon's utility. An additional change I'd appreciate is for stamina to be used in all weapons and attacks or their movesets, not just a select few. I don't necessarily need it to be used for every single attack, but it needs to be used in some manner for every weapon. And I have played all the weapons except the light bowgun because I hate it! And I find that I always gravitate towards weapons that provide me the widest variety of interactions with the monster. A personal aside, but I really, really want to love the hammer. However, since many weapons can do what the hammer can do equally well, and the hammer has very limited interactions with monster and range. Oh my god, is the range of the hammer so incredibly small, that in almost all entries in the series, I find myself frustrated at worst or bored at best by the hammer. So, before I go into the individual weapons, I'd like to talk about the roles and the flavors that they could provide. It's nothing exciting or groundbreaking. It's pretty much been standard in game design since board games were invented. So you have your damage output, or DPS. You could have 3 flavors here. You could have a burst damage, a hit and runner, continual damage, high aggression, low cost action, opportunistic damage. Example would be counters or criticals on weakened spots. That's something I'll get to soon. I do not believe criticals should be a random % chance of occurring, but criticals should only be granted when attacked on a weakened spot of a monster, or a spot on a monster where your weapon does particularly well against. And you could obviously change the levels, the damage variation based on that. If it's a spot that your weapon is good against, you get a plus. If it's a spot your monster is good against, your weapon's good against, and it's weakened, you get a plus plus. That kind of thing. All right, so then the next group would be the monster crowd control, or the tank. Again, you have 3 flavors: controlling the monster movement, controlling the monster attention or state, and controlling monster options, their attacks, their blocking, through blocking, preventing, or breaking monster parts to prevent attacks. And lastly, you have your teammate support, or the support group. And not to say that they're relegated to only support. That's not what I'm getting at here. I'll get to that all out soon here. But this could have 3 or 4 sections. You can have healing and buffing in some manner, traps and items in some manner, creating advantageous opportunities such as blights, trips, and so on. And you could also have some kind of interaction with the palicos and palamutes. That would be something interesting to see. This is very conventional and well defined in the industry, I know. But potentially all weapons could be selecting a variety of these roles at one time, and then optimizing a select few of them. For example, a sword and shield can do continual damage, opportunistic damage, and healing and buffing, traps and items, controlling monster attacks, but it cannot do all of these things perfectly, being required to sacrifice the efficacy of some for the efficacy of the others. So maybe at best it could focus on continual damage and healing and buffing and controlling monster attacks. Or maybe they decide to focus on opportunistic damage and traps and items. And they only get those 2, but they do those 2 particularly well through their skill set that they've allotted into their armor and weapon. A longsword user can potentially do burst damage, opportunistic damage, controlling monster movement, and continual damage. Maybe traps and items as well, since they have a relatively high sheep speed. But it is up to the player to balance which of these things their set or build will do the best. That being said, I believe the dance with the monster and one's teammates is the component that needs the most attention and the lightest touch, as to not railroad the players into a set path. It would be great to see something like a Gunlance user attacking from range. I'll get to that soon. I have a complete rework for the Gunlance. Then swap positions of a Lance or a Charge Blade user who was in the monster's face. so they can focus on the tail or leg, or go sharpen, or recharge their stamina or heal, etc. And when the Gunlance steps out back into a ranged position, maybe a Greatsword runs up and lands a nice hefty 2-3 hit combo, creating more openings for the other members. If the game's core mechanics and rules of interaction with the monster, environment, and players are designed to accommodate teamwork, it will naturally become common and easily executed, rather than something you have to go out of your way for, or by doing self-imposed rules, or something that feels like you're not contributing while you're waiting for said opportunity. And as a side note I have is here as well, that I'm so incredibly happy to see more weapons be given blocks, counters, and effective dodges. Of course, GU I think was the best in this case, but however, I would like to see blocking have improved physics and various degrees of efficacy beyond pure ability to block and stamina depletion. So before I move forward into the weapons, again, I'll explain this. So number one is that block should be given physics collision, and depending on momentum, currently faked through that motion value system, the player will be pushed in the direction of the attack, block the attack, and cause the attack and its animation to be diminished, just as we have when striking a tough spot on a monster. This should also protect those behind in an arc shape most likely, or completely stop the attack, protecting those behind in an arc shape most likely. Number two, parries and counters keep the monster in the appropriate position for the player to easily utilize the counterattack portion of the action if desired. This is specific really for Charge Blade and Lance, but again, any weapon that has a counter or a parry should be able to do this. There should be no magic clipping or ghosting through the player, monster, or environment. I know that's difficult to do in any video game, even in modern games, but I really, really want no more clipping. It's really frustrating when you parry or counter with a lance and you just completely whiff because the monster's 10 feet behind you now. Currently, the easiest and most powerful counters all belong to the longsword, whereas a sword and shield, charge blade, lance, gun lance, and especially the hammer require more from the player and uncontrollable circumstance to utilize effectively, especially the hammer and lance. I think the hammer's got the worst end of the stick, but at least it finally got a counter. 3. Sharpness should be given a closer look for balance reasons. I love the concept, but I question the implementation. I think that it would function better if it was kept super simple. Its function is to be a damage buff for a limited time and then eventually a debuff if not maintained or attended to. I don't know exactly what to do here. I've thought about it for a while, and nothing I've come up with has been a perfect solution, but I do have a mention of it later when I talk about damage as a whole. 4 should be switch skills and weapon arts. Great ideas. I want this to be in the game, provided they offer a weapon, a move with a different use case that has value. Some moves in previous games simply don't offer enough to be used. I do think the switch skill system is superior to the weapons arts that we had in GU/XX, and I hope that they stay around. I'd love it to be tied to your ability to adept dodge as well, making it so that you can't adept dodge more than twice. And adept dodging sacrifices your damage potential, or your moveset potential, that you would otherwise have. And I know that's not particularly related to blocking, but it would be in the sense that it's a defensive maneuver. But yeah, I didn't have anywhere else to put that little bit either. Weapons rolls should be deepened, meaning giving the player and monster more possible interactions for solo play and cooperative play. For example, with the above changes to a shield, a lance user now has a sense of agency to be in front of the monster and maintain his attention, as it can neutralize many of its threats, only needing to step away to regain stamina so he can return to his position. And my last side note in this little section, I swear. So I'm really, really glad to see the introduction of a mechanic that increases the odds of being targeted by a monster. It's my favorite skill, it really is. And someday I hope we can also joust on the top of the dogs. That'd be really fun. You know, I really want to joust with Diablos, but yeah. Anyways. So next, I'd like to detail a few changes to some of the weapons that I believe would deepen their experiences and provide more interaction with the monsters, but please know these are just my personal takes on the weapons from playing them from Portable Third onwards, and how I would best enjoy the weapons. I'm sure there are a ton of people that are going to be completely appalled by my changes to their favorite weapon or just a weapon that they tend to like. But nonetheless, here we go. So the hammer. I want to get this out of the way the first because there's a lot. uh, Hammer is a really tough one to pin down. So I really want to love this weapon, but I'm disappointed or bored by it in almost every entry in the series, as I said earlier. Either other weapons outperform it in its intended role, the ability to stun monsters and break parts, or they just outright outperform it in other manners, usually damage or movement. I feel Hammer needs to move away from the charging mechanic. I think it needs to completely abandon charging. It would benefit from stealing from the longsword. So I think it should become the blunt counter weapon, specializing in adept dodges, please, and counters. If possible, being heavily rewarded for striking a monster not only in its vulnerable spots, but during vulnerable moments. An easy solution for this would be to give the hammer an additional damage tick and potentially critical chance for countering or striking a monster while it is in what is considered a vulnerable state, i.e. trapped, tripped, blinded, charging a special attack like Zinogre's Roar, sleeping, or whatever other states there may be. However, I'm aware this would essentially be a ramped up adept style hammer, and I'm perfectly okay with that. So one is to remove charge attacks. Two, all attacks can counter. This is controversial, I'm sure, but what I would want it to do is require pausing and proper timing of swings similar to the longsword's reward for players properly timing their combo chain. The hammer's head has to hit the monster's attacking hitbox to give the counter. However, this counter shouldn't work on heavy, very heavy, or supernova-like attacks. Maybe it also shouldn't work on ranged attacks, but I guess that's debatable. It'd be kind of annoying if you couldn't smack a fireball away with a giant rock, but you know. It would essentially just block most of the damage and send the player staggering backwards if they did try to counter one of these heavy, or supernova attacks. So it would be similar to blocking with the sword and shield in that manner because you would stagger backwards and still take some damage. Maybe you could allow this to be buffed by guard or guard up, but I don't think that would be necessary because it's not technically a guard, it's a counter. 3 would be the weapon needs to focus on a 1 to 5 hit combo chain. I think 3 or more, if needed or doable combo paths, should be woven together the same as a longsword. So that would be a miracle for the weapon to have a 1 to 5 hit combo chain. And you got 3 different paths to go through this combo chain. So you got a combo chain for each, option that the monster could be leading into. And you got to time those swings just right to either counter what the monster is doing or get the full damage off. Number 4, its attacks consume a lot of stamina, making more than 3 attacks in a row require a great window of opportunity, thus meaning no wasted action. You can't dodge out of the way real quick and then continue your attack. Once you dodge, you're committed to that dodge. You got to reset. Or if you attack and miss, that's just a shame. Your combo path has basically been killed now because you didn't get the full effect out. And then number 5, of course, is to have the dodge be the adept dodge. I just would love this as a standard dodge for all weapons, but I know that's kind of overpowered if it was, and we're going to get something like that in Monster Hunter Rise Sunbreak, unfortunately. So I'm not sure how all that's going to go, although I was hoping they would add that, but I think the implementation is not going to be exactly what I wanted. In this case, I think if you're going to give this weapon an adept dodge, it should either cost a skill point, so you, like I mentioned earlier, lose a damage opportunity, lose a moveset opportunity, or it should degrade the weapon's sharpness. That would work as well. Gunlance. Alright, let's get the second hardest one to talk about out of the way. So, in Rise, it feels mostly good. So good that I couldn't develop a solid argument or use case for using the lance in comparison. Sorry, old friend. But I think it still needs an overhaul, as we have an imbalance in ranged and melee weapons. I mean, if you look, we got 3 ranged weapons, and all the rest are melee, so it'd be nice to see a difference. I think that is actually one of the reasons why they moved away from having ranged-only armor, because it kind of felt pointless to make armor for a ranged weapon when you have to make that armor specifically for that individual ranged weapon, and there's only 3 of them, so it was a lot of resources. Although I wish those armor designs would come back because they were my favorite. So, as we have an imbalance in those ranged and melee weapons, as I just mentioned, I'd like to see the gun lance become a hybrid that bridges both worlds, as its name implies. Make it a gun and a lance. So number 1, change shelling to attacks that behave like heavy bowguns cluster ammo. Ammo required 2, but the player should be able to carry a large quantity. So I don't necessarily mean all the ammo types for the shelling is changed to this. So for example, long shells should be the cluster type. Normal shells should be essentially normal shot for the gun lance, but instead should shoot something like an instant explosive sticky shot. So it goes out and instantly blows up, rewarding the player for hitting the monster in the head. It should also have a lower, KO threshold since you'll be able to shoot so many of them. Wide should be the current normal shells, plus maybe a stun effect or a trip effect. That would be great. Number 2 change is the Wyvern Blast should be a ranged level shot. A quick mini Rajang-like beam with a big boom at the end, maybe a half or a fourth a second later. And number 3, add a heat gauge, I know, calm down, that builds up as shells are fired and removes sharpness degradation for shelling attacks. The heat gauge increases melee attacks like the longsword spirit gauge and is consumed with melee attacks. It could also either decrease shelling damage slightly or cause shell shot deviation, rewarding the players for switching between long and close range with the weapon. So ideally, you'd have this situation where you're at long range using the shelling attacks or your normal shot, and then once your heat gauge is built up enough, you reload, go in close, and start wailing on the monster and utilizing your wide shots just to keep that gauge up until it goes down far enough. And then you got to retreat, go back, and start using your other shots again. I also, for my last change, number 4, think that they got to keep the counter. They absolutely got to keep the counter. I don't really care if they keep the Wormstake Blast or the other additions that follow the counter, but they got to keep the counter. It's amazing having that counter on the gun lance. I love it so much. The Longsword is currently the king of player choice, polish design, and monster interaction. It provides the player every possible interaction Monster Hunter's combat system has to offer. Yes, it can even KO monsters as well as the hammer can if one takes the time to learn how to. I don't actually have any issue with how well the Longsword performs in any of these functions. In fact, I think it's the gold standard, along with the Rise's dual blades, for polishing a weapon's moveset and mechanics. All of its options are viable and all have value. Unfortunately, not all the longswords themselves have value and or are useful. My absolute favorite thing about the longsword is that it rewards the player for patience and avoiding smashing buttons. However, it rarely punishes the player for being hasty and going right in to their next attack. So while it rewards you for good play, it doesn't punish you for poor play. What I would want to see from future designs of the longsword's mechanics is, number 1, greater risk for the various counters, either consuming sharpness, spirit gauge, stamina, or health in some manner. An example would be feeling a counter causes the player to receive 150% damage of the attack that hit them. Number 2, potentially removing counters, but add parries that allow you to freely reposition and give a slight buff in some manner. So the difference between a counter and parry, for people that don't know, is a parry is not an offensive move, it's a defensive move or a positional move. So by parrying something, you put yourself in a position to do damage safely. Number 3, the spirit gauge being consumed completely on specific counters or moves, or potentially all counters if balance requires, though I don't believe it does. Alright, the Charge Blade. So this is again a difficult weapon to talk about briefly. So, straight to the point. Rise Charge Blade is awful in almost every way compared to any previous game, and Charge Blade reached its pinnacle as Adept style in GU or Double Cross. No, Valor wasn't as good, but it was probably more fun, because it was completely broken, but Adept was perfect. So, Number one change. The base play style would be essentially the Adept style. With the sword and shield, you focus on quick, decent damage and perfect blocking, which can trigger a stagger, trip, or break. Requires better physics so monsters don't ghost through you anymore. With Axe mode, you gain Adept dodge and you focus on dealing damage and stun. And you also get the file damage, which goes through the monster's quote-unquote armor or defenses. Number two is that the axe mode and weapon transitions need balance passes with the pacing/timing of the monsters and their animations. I really didn't have an issue with this in any previous game. I thought they were pretty much perfect, except for Rise. They're just plain awful because they added that new skill that speeds up the animations, so I think they delayed them purposely, so when you add that skill, it doesn't become ridiculous. It's either that or the monsters themselves were sped up just a little bit and it made the pacing just wonky. Number three, sword attacks need to have more value than just charging files, and may arguably need better combo pass. So if the shield functioned how it did in Adept mode from GU/Double Cross and Sword mode, that would be amazing. I personally don't like the placement or the timing or the use case for the sliding slash. I don't think it's very useful for the weapon. It could use such a move, but if it had a separate way of activating it that still allowed the player to access that access to its previous combo pass. It would also be cool if that sliding slash ended in a guard point. I don't believe it does, at least not anymore. I could be wrong on that. It would be double cool if you could slide in front of a teammate to guard for them. What I would like is for this, sliding slash to maybe just become a swappable skill that you could activate quickly. Maybe instead of your XA shield bash when you're in sword and shield mode, you could have it be the sliding slash instead. But it feels really wonky in the current combo path, and whenever I use it, it usually feels like an accident because I'm stuck in Adept mode from GU/Double Cross, or I'm stuck in 4U's Charge Blade. In World, it didn't feel as bad. I didn't mind it in World, but I preferred not to use it. I usually liked to side hop and then continue attacking. Number four is the SAED and the AED need better animation pacing and better ability to control and aim them. I actually think in Rise they had a little sneaky update that fixed this because the first month or two when I was playing Rise, I just could not aim these things for the life of me. And then when I came back to it a little bit later, when my mom picked up the game to play with her, I found I could magically aim it all of a sudden. So it seems to have been improved. But I also want better balance in terms of the hitboxes. Personally, I think the explosion should all land in the same spot, not travel through the monster. So currently we have elemental and non-elemental. The non-elemental travels in a straight line, and the elemental goes out in this kind of wave-like pyramid structure in front of you, and that still travels with the monster. I'd rather have it be maybe the elemental just explodes in kind of like a wall in front of you, and the non-elemental explodes in a radius in front of you where you swung it. That would be probably better in my opinion. And actually, I really do like that sliding move that we gained with the wire bug, but I doubt we'll see anything similar in the future titles. So maybe whatever key bindings we use for that sliding function in future games, or for those skill attacks in future games, we could have this wirebug sliding move replaced with the sliding slash, and maybe give the sliding slash a little bit longer range and better animation timing for the shield portion. So the Insect Glaive, the weapon that actually got me to try Monster Hunter 4U, and I hated everything about 4U until I came back to it years later. But that's a different story, I suppose. So Insect Glaive's problem has always been the Kinsect. It feels like a chore to use the Kinsect rather than a rewarding integral part of the weapon. I'm sad to see Rise didn't rework the weapon considering the amazing opportunity with the wire bugs, but that's probably because wire bugs will not transition into future games. So what I propose is number one, to rework the current buffing mechanic. Make it so hitting the monster with the glaive itself gives you the buffs similar to 2 Charge Blade or Dual Blades charging up mechanics. You just hit the part enough times to get the buff naturally. Number two, Make marking for the Kinsect valuable by having the Kinsect auto-attack until stamina is gone. Also increase speeds of bugs significantly so that you can use other types of bug builds. This could easily lead to cut tails, broken parts, and stunts. Nice to have, but not needed. Make it so marking can be reset or canceled easily, because you can't do that currently in I think any game in the series. That's just a weird oversight that I can't believe they've ever fixed. I don't know if there's just not a good way of doing it, or they just thought, it doesn't matter. Yeah. And a quick note on number 1 as well, before I go into number 3, is that I really think that is a good idea to have you get those buffs from hitting different parts of the monster, because the Insect Glaive already has amazing mobility, and your ability to swap and jump around to different parts of the monster is, second to none, and maybe the longsword's better. Basically second to none. So being able to jump around and get all those buffs really rewards you for using the Insect Glaive the way it's intended to be used, which is to be an annoying little pest jumping around the monster. Number 3, when the bug returns and is resting, make the bug attack with the glaive strikes add additional damage to strikes and status effect potentially. Number 4, make Kinsect powders and pollens. Are they called pollens or powders? An item the player can use at will if the right bug is equipped, just how oils were for sword and shield, or specific ammo types for specific bow guns and bows. Number 5, return mounting for aerial attacks. This should be done with all weapons, but especially at least this weapon. Also fix wonky hitboxes when doing aerials. It's a little annoying when you get hit by something that clearly didn't touch you. Number 6, aerial attacks should be slightly faster for the following reason. And initiations should be adept dodges that deal minor damage if a monster hits the player during that portion of the move. And that's why I want it to be slightly faster, just because if you get that adept dodge, that should take up a decent amount of animation already. So your aerial attack should just be a little bit faster to cover up that. And that's all my proposed changes for that. The dual blades. Keep them exactly as they are in Monster Hunter Rise. Don't you dare touch them. They're perfect. This is the first game that I actually liked the dual blades, and I wanted to play them the entire damn time. Don't touch them, please. I mean, I guess GU and Double Cross were kind of close. Adept and Valor style were pretty fun, but yeah, don't touch them. They're perfect in Rise. I've never liked them more. Okay, because I didn't really say anything about the dual blades because they're perfect, I'd like to mention an addition that I think we should carry over from Frontier, like many of the other things I've carried over from Tier. The Tonfas. Now, I think they need a complete rework if they were to come into the game, but essentially I'd like people to think of them as, if the dual blades are like the Greatsword, then the Tonfa is like the Switch Axe. That's essentially what I want them to be. So you got number 1, standard mode. It deals blunt damage, but is similar to standard dual blade attacks. Number 2, in its special mode, it gains Mind's Eye and a finisher move that consumes this mode, but deals true damage like a gun lance or Switch Axe's explosions. And number 3, instead of a counter, it gets a block. And I think that would be all you need. Doesn't need a counter, just needs a block. And it's essentially blunt dual blades with little tiny explosive bits for true damage and Mind's Eye. That would be great. So, I don't personally dislike the overhaul the Hunting Horn received. However, what it needs more than anything are quality of life changes so that you can focus on fighting the monster and not your HUD and UI. But maybe that's just me. I also have to admit I play Hunting Horn in multiplayer only and not very often. But my reason for that is, like I mentioned earlier, I tend to gravitate towards weapons that have as many possible interactions with the monster as possible, and I find the Hunting Horn's interactions to be rather limited outside of GU Double Cross. I have to say I always find that I use only 1 or 3 of the Hunting Horns out of the entire roster, which I suppose I do the same with other weapons like the Longsword, but it feels more egregious for the Hunting Horn to do so. So my 2 changes. Number 1, add an adept dodge. Yeah, I want this for everything, I admit, but it's got to have some kind of cost. But it absolutely has to be on the Hunting Horn, I think, because I don't think it would be justifiable to give the Hunting Horn a counter, and I don't think it would be justifiable to give the Hunting Horn a block. So it just needs an adept dodge. So that way, You can perfectly time your dodge and stay in the fight and not feel like you're um, somehow lacking in defensive options. And number two, it needs its songs to have an increased value and much, much, much fewer annoying HUD and UI clutter. That's all I want for the hunting horn. And I'd probably play it a hell of a lot more if it did. So, Switch X, I don't got all that many recommendations either. So I got four here and no overall notes other than these. So number one, I like to remove the switch speed changing skill. I don't think we need that at all. Shouldn't apply to any weapon. It's horrible. Absolutely hate that. That's the speed should just be the base speed of the weapon. Number two, remove or do not add the skill that restores the gauge. It's not needed, and I think it lowers the skill ceiling of the weapon. I found at Rise that I've basically never ever had to think about my combo pass with Switch Axe. I just kind of mash buttons. Especially one of the easiest ways to play is just to spam the R trigger and just keep switching between those two modes. And yeah, it's not the most efficient way, but it's completely brainless and it's very effective. Um, 3. Add either an adept dodge or a block function. I'd be fine with either. You could potentially give it a counter or maybe a parry, but yeah, really, I think it would be better off having a block or just a dodge for repositioning. It feels more in tune with the nature of the weapon. You could potentially make a block during the sword mode and a dodge during the axe mode or something like that, since the sword mode is more stable and not as flicky, and the axe mode you can move a whole heck of a lot more. Number 4, it may indeed be this way, to be honest. The sword mode should have Mind's Eye, and the axe mode should have Part Breaker. The reason why I said it should indeed be, or it may indeed be this way, is because I don't believe the axe mode actually has Part Breaker. It may correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think it does. I haven't noticed increased part breaking speed compared to other weapons, but maybe it does indeed have it. So, Great Sword, I have 2 notes, even fewer than Switch Axe. Goes to show how much I like the weapon, I suppose. So, number 1, remove moves that no longer have a function or a reasonable use case. Alternatively, they could be adjusted to have a reasonable use case, or, just swapped out with different movesets, which they're actually doing in Sunbreak, I do believe. If it's already out at this time, then you would know. Yeah, I think that would be a great function, because there are tons of moves in this weapon that I never touch. Number 2, I would like to add a lunging side sweep that is good at tripping, reasonably fast, but cannot be charged and does not count as the shortcut into the combo chain. That's it. That's all I'd like to see. Although admittedly from the previews of Sunbreak that I've seen at the time of recording, it seems like the new Greatsword may be what I'm looking for. But I already love the weapon as it is. I don't think it needs a whole lot. It just needs to have its combo chain, reworked and just simplified, brought down a notch, get rid of the junk it doesn't need for the current iteration of the series. Alright, the Lance. So, here's my changes for the Lance. It should one-shot kill every monster when you block. That's it. Alright, on to the sword and shield. No, I'm just kidding. So, number 1. It should have improved physics for blocking and countering, so that either you are moved backwards or the monster is stopped in their tracks depending on the weight of the monster's attack. Should use the momentum system. Number 2, poking with the shield up should be completely guarded, but keep the low damage and slow animation. 3, guarding should allow you to block attacks for your teammates. 4, a taunt or attack that causes the monster to be more likely to focus on you. And 5, 1 or more shield-focused moves. One of these could be the taunt attack I just mentioned. I like all the moves that we have now. I'm just greedy, and I think we need a couple more shield-focused moves. And number 6, finally, the real reason I play Gun Lance over Lance in every game. Lances with telescoping designs to actually telescope so you aren't walking around with a 10-foot pole on your back. It just drives me insane because it looks so ugly. I'm sure there's a lot of players that love the way it looks, but I hate it. I'm sorry. I really don't like it. I want the weapon to telescope and be small and actually fit on my character so it looks like it's something he would carry around. The Sword and Shield. So, this I have almost nothing to say because, again, it's a pretty damn perfect weapon. I love it, except for I don't love how The vast majority of the swords and shields are not particularly worth using currently, but that's because of the damage model and how damage works in the game, not the weapons themselves, I do believe. So for sword and shield, I would say that the counter, it's natural counter that it has, not the silkbind ones or the skill-based ones in GU or Double Cross. The counter needs a little love. It could simply be addressed with some improved physics that the other shielded weapons would require. And that's about it. I really think that's all it needs, is that counter just needs a little tiny bit of love. And the bow. The bow is good. I don't know. Maybe add some more shot type diversity, or make the shot types we've lost return as special shot types you can use as some coatings or something. Keep the counter or the adept dodge bolt thing that it has. Love that. Other than that, I can't really think of anything to add to the bow. I think it's great. It's fun. I like it. I find it a little boring. I played it a heck of a lot more in GU and in 4U than I do in Rise. But I think it's a good weapon. It's fun. It's entertaining. I probably just don't play it as much because the armors don't look cool anymore. That's probably about it. Yeah, I don't really think it needs too many changes. It's pretty good. Maybe it's a little too strong, but yeah, it's fine. So the bowguns. Oh man. I have so many thoughts from Portable Third, 4U, GU, and Rise. Recently I've come to love 4U and Portable Third's bowguns the best out of all of them. Specifically the heavy bowgun. I'll never touch the light bowgun. I just hate it so much. So basically my notes for the heavy the bowguns is to just remove them from the game, and I think it would be better. No, I'm just kidding. I like the heavy bowgun. So bowguns, they're really the hardest to talk about and hardest to balance because any change to the maps, the items, anything heavily affects them. So that's not even to mention how they have the most complicated stats out of any weapon, in my opinion. And this makes most of them feel or are actually ineffective throughout the series, which is frustration. And a lot of times I find that the meta bowgun is not even the bowgun I prefer to use. I usually find something like the Kelby bowgun, a heavy bowgun, or Monoblos' heavy bowgun is what I prefer to use. I love those. They're intensely fun compared to what the meta ones usually are, at least for me. But some changes I would recommend. I got 6 total, and I'll go through these, I suppose, as quickly as I can. So number 1, since crafting items instantly anywhere would no longer be an option, I would increase the carryable ammo quantity per ammo type. I can't really provide detailed information here because it's just completely dependent on the intended balance of each ammo, which I do believe the ammos need a rebalance because where they were in something like 4U, Portable Third, felt amazing. But where they were in even GU, didn't feel so great compared to. And I don't even think they really changed too much from GU to 4U, to be honest. But heavy bowgun and light bowgun both felt super, super powerful in GU. Number 2, remove ammo level variations. I would no longer have normal 1, 2, 3, just normal. Same for the other types that have 1, 2, 3 levels. Number 3, I would make internal ammo as the infinite ammo type, making paths for weapons diverse, potentially making one with infinite cluster, one with infinite pierce, etc. But the standard is normal. Personally, I don't really want any ranged weapon to have a kind of infinite ammo, but I can live it as technically melee weapons all have infinite ammo as well. Infinite use. And I know some people might freak out over the thought of infinite cluster or infinite sticky ammo, something like that, but again, it goes down to the balance. I think it could be balanced perfectly fine because I think those types of ammo need to be heavily looked at for their balance anyways. 4, I think ammo types need to receive some damage balance passes, as I've been mentioning. Ammo meant for utility and ammo meant for damage of any type should be better defined. For instance, normal shots are your standard fare, and you should use them the majority of any hunt. But if you find yourself closer than you like to be, the spread ammo could give you the same damage, but add minor stagger effect, or maybe a crit damage based on the weak spots. Pierce would be better at long range and great at damaging parts of the monster that are tough. Not not have this weird shot down the long side of the monster mechanic. I don't really like that. I find it silly. I'm sure a lot of people love it, but I don't find it particularly rewarding. Um, Shrapnel could be a great flinch or tripping tool, but be very limited in ammo. Elemental ammos could inflict blights, as well as deal extra damage according to their element. And having a weapon that specializes in spread, normal, or pierce is fine, so long as it doesn't become a one-trick pony. I really don't like all the bow guns that use one ammo and one ammo type only, and they just puck craft thousands of that ammo and they never run out because they just go back to base and get more ammo. It feels like you're completely breaking and abusing the game's intended design, but it is technically in the intended design because the game allows you to do it. So, number 5. As the heavy bowgun without the shield modification plays very similar to light bowgun, particularly in Rise, I believe the light and heavy distinction should simply be that, with shield or without shield. Having a shield can prevent you from utilizing or allow you to utilize certain skills, moves, ammo, etc. for balance purposes. If need be, by unifying the bowguns once again, I think is the correct path to take. Although I'd really be sad to see all the cool designs vanish, especially the cool heavy bowguns with the power barrel or the light bowguns with the silencer and all that. Um, Maybe we could have these added in as layered options or optional build paths for the weapons. It really sucked to see all those beautiful designs go away. Some of them are just so cool. And number 6, this is something I'd personally like to see, and I think is heavily debatable. But I really like to see the speeds of the ammo and the ranges increased across the board. Not dramatically, but maybe something like a 2.5 to a 5% increase. I think that would be enough. I think bows could also use a slight range increase as well, but specifically the bow guns should have something there. Um, I think it would make the weapons feel a lot better, especially if you're going to utilize the heavy bowgun with the low mobility and actually return crouching fire and squat down and unleash a bunch of bullets while the monster's jumping all over the place. And a final thing, I would like the bullets to be small again. Just those small little glowing dots that they were in 4U and Portable Third. I love that design. I don't know why. It looked really impressive. It looked like you're shooting little balls of plasma, whereas now they look like little rockets that are being fired out of your gun super slow. So I like the old design of the bullets, which is, you know, dumb. I know. It's not really important at all. All right, weapon categories and functions. This is again kind of a long section, but we'll get through it. So, first and foremost, I would keep it stupid simple. Use the KISS method. Let's use Greatsword as an example. There should be a path for the raw Greatsword, the critical Greatsword, the elemental Greatsword, and a status Greatsword. Each main tree for a Greatsword should branch off into each section within. Well, it doesn't necessarily need to go into each section, but some variety of the sections. There should never be more than 3 options per branch. So if you're going into the raw Greatsword branch, there shouldn't be more than 3 versions of that raw Greatsword on that branch for that weapon. Something like 1 for high damage value, 1 for high sharpness, and 1 for whatever special stat that weapon may have based on its monster. This comes in from my earlier comment about sharpness. This is where I think sharpness could be balanced and better brought into play by having a specific branch of a weapon specialize in sharpness and its specialty, like raw damage or status or elemental. So for example, you could have an elemental tree with a fire greatsword. One can become one of 3 options from fire monster parts used, each focusing on a different aspect or end build goal for that weapon. So if there are more than 3 fire monsters in the game, the other monsters can and should be used for the weapon's cosmetic layers, imbuing a unique skill or a unique weapon on its own tree. You could have non-elemental weapons should function as the baseline for weapon stats. So this is your raw, your non-elemental. These should be applicable in all scenarios. Jack of all monsters, but a master of none. If you look at the math in most of the games in the series, reveals that this is not the case. The critical-based weapons should be used to exploit weak spots and to take advantage of damage opportunities more efficiently than non-elemental weapons. greater challenge to utilize as damage would be overall lower, unless exploiting a weak spot or a vulnerable position such as Zinogre charging up his lightning or Rathian or Nargacuga preparing their tail flip. Elemental weapons should always be king of the hill in regards to the monsters that are weak against their element. Maybe saved for select species who are intended to be as such. I'd be perfectly fine with that and add a little flavor to them. Currently, there are very limited appreciable advantages to using elemental weapons over non-elemental or critical-based weapon for weapons meant to have superior utilization of their elemental nature. Furthermore, with the introduction of elemental blights and rise affecting monsters as well, elemental weapons should be capable of inflicting these blights themselves. Status weapons, such as poison, paralysis, sleep, and blast, I feel are fine as is, maybe a slight buff here or there. Most are slightly weaker than other options, but provide adequate utility to the players. Although, I can say that sleep has been essentially worthless in Monster Hunter Rise, so, but that's a specific, game's case, I suppose. So, combos and such. Well, I do admit the animations and combos of Monster Hunter are some of the best and my favorite in video games. They're pretty much fantastic. I do miss the weight of individual attacks that we had in older games, and of course a large part of that is just the increased health pool and the reduced amount of effects that you get from individual swings because you are now much more capable of keeping pace with the monster and attacking them more frequently compared to as before. Well, I believe some weapons should definitely remain combo focused. The weapons that were not designed with combos in mind are suffering from the lengthy amount of combo chains that must be completed to get to a desired attack or state. I have some ideas to remedy this, but primarily it would go back to an old controller system that Monster Hunter actually had in the first game and the second game, and multiple other game series had similar control schemes, but they all, along with Monster Hunter, have abandoned those control schemes as the series have moved on. So there must be some kind of limitation that I'm blind to. However, to give an example of how it works for anyone who's not aware, and to elaborate on modern improvements that I would like to see for it, is essentially using the right joystick to control the weapon path during an attack. No attack input being a neutral forward. No input from the right joystick being a neutral forward. And any other following the direction of motion. So I would move the attack buttons from being X and A, for example, on the Switch, or was it triangle and 0 or triangle and O, or the circle for PlayStation, from being the attack buttons to being the shoulder mounted buttons, and using the right joystick in conjunction to do the various attacks. This would also mean that the guard button or shield button would have to be moved to another location, but I think that's doable. And if you were to do that, you could have multiple variations, because you could have not only with modern controllers the 4 cardinal directions, but you could also have a push in for like a thrust or maybe a backwards aiming attack of some kind. And then you could also have circular motions for circular strikes and things like that. I think it'd be very interesting. It'd be really fun to learn how to do combos with that system. And of course, when you're not pressing an attack button down to do an attack, then your camera would function as normal with that stick. You'd just be moving the camera. So in that regard, maybe it'd be a little awkward for people to use. Recently, I've been using a controller that has the XAYB or the triangle, square, circle, X buttons on the bottom of the controller, so where your fingers can touch them, tips of your fingers. So I don't have to use my thumb to hit the buttons. And I will admit, it is a steep learning curve to learn how to use the attack buttons while moving the joystick with my right thumb, because I'm so used to using my right thumb to do attacks and having the camera be stationary during them. So there's a steep learning curve to it, and maybe this is the only reason why it's been abandoned, just to simplify the process of control. But I think if they added a system like this, you could further improve upon the momentum system that we have in the game that I believe is called motion value. And you could add a little more weight to those animations. You could also eliminate animation canceling more effectively, because just doing that kind of rotation or flick with the joystick for most people is going to take them half a second or a second. Well, probably not a second, more like half a second. And you could just space out those animations better to be more natural between the uh, ending of one animation to the entry of a new animation. And I would really appreciate that, because I personally cannot stand animation canceling. I absolutely hate it. I think it is a horribly lazy design in any video game. If if I'm committing to an action, if I'm making an action, I need to face the consequences for those actions. I should not be able to immediately cancel that animation and recover from it. If I can do that, first of all, it breaks a sense of realism, because it's like all that weight and the momentum just vanishes immediately. Um, but if you can do that, then other cases where you are stuck and committed to an animation feel even worse. So a good example would be there are many attacks where you can attack and then immediately dodge out of the way. And if you have Evade Extender 3 on, you're pretty much always going to be safe doing that. Or in GU, for example, if you have Adept style on, you're going to be fine. But if you use an attack like Charge Blades, uh, you know, big swing explosion, then SAD, then you're going to be stuck to that animation, and you can't really do anything. You can't dodge out of it, not until a significant portion of the animation is played out. So it's a much larger commitment. And not being able to cancel all that is fine, assuming that regularly you cannot cancel out of all the other animations. But there is so much animation canceling now in Rise that I don't feel like I'm really committed to any action. It's one of the reasons why I actually enjoy the longsword so much, is because you have a reason not to hit the B button and dodge immediately out of the harm's way when you're fighting a monster, because that monster having an attack coming your way presents an opportunity to counter and to continue your fight without backing off. And you also have a reason to pause and allow the animation to fully play out, because the longsword's combo paths are so well defined that you can play the full animation, and you have, I think it's maybe about 3/4 a second. It's very short, but it's just enough time to where you can see what the monster's going to do and then do the next part of the combo, which is incredible, and it feels so nice, whereas a lot of the other weapons don't quite have that. I feel like I'm just kind of mashing buttons because I don't know exactly where the animation will cause me to enter into the combo path from the beginning again or continue through the combo path. Now that may be my lack of experience with other weapons, but I honestly didn't start using the longsword a whole lot until Rise. I used it a tidbit in 4U and kind of hated it, and I used it in GU quite a bit because it was fun, but it was not my primary weapon. I think I still have less than 100 hunts with it in GU. Yeah, I don't know. They just did an amazing job in Rise with how its animations and its combo paths play out. Whereas a lot of other weapons, I don't feel that way. The only other one that I feel is remotely close to it is Gunlance, and that could just be familiarity, since I've played Gunlance in every single game except for World, where for some reason I just didn't like it as much. Um, I really should go back and replay World with Gunlance, because I think I played it maybe 10 times. And lastly, this is not really connected to anything, but it would be really cool if we were to implement this kind of control scheme, to implement some kind of pole flail or pole axe type weapon path, or type of weapon that we could have in the game for a new weapon. We don't really have a place for it. It wouldn't really be a big need, but if you are going to remove Gunlance, as my suggestions were to be, from being a melee weapon, this could be Gunlance's replacement, and essentially fill that role of being like a medium range explosive weapon, basically stealing a lot of attacks from the Charge Blade, but being a much more focused iteration of using those blast type attacks from the flail, flipping around and smacking into things and blowing up. I think that'd be really cool. It could be maybe a dodge or positional based weapon like the old longsword used to be. but with the Charge Blade or Gunlance's explosive capabilities. I think that'd be a really interesting iteration, especially if you're using that control scheme where you're using the joystick to manipulate the direction of the flail and where it's going. That would be really fun. But it's just a fun little thing I thought of. I don't know how that would work, and I really don't think there's a need for a weapon like that on the roster unless they're going to completely remove something. If they were to completely remove something, I kind of have a feeling it would be the Insect Glaive, unfortunately. It's just a weapon that I feel like it's going to go eventually. They've struggled with every iteration of it in some aspect. I don't know how, unless the next game of the series just perfects the Insect Blade and makes it at least as polished as the Dual Blades or Sword and Shield is now, I have a feeling that it will eventually fall out of favor in the series and get replaced by something. Armors and skills. This is, again, a difficult one for me to really decide which one I like best, but I think I'd have to say that it was the old system that I preferred the most. I really do like both the old and new systems, but neither of their implementations was perfect. So I suppose I should just get right into why I believe so. I'd really like to see a hybrid of the systems, to be honest. Something that would be much more appealing. So, point number one would be craftable from low rank and upgraded into high rank and beyond. So whatever low rank armor you have, you can upgrade it from the very beginning all the way up into the highest level of the game, whatever that ends up being. This would cut down on the redundant armors and all the needless clutter. Plus, it would make low rank everything have value, so there would be a reason to go back and actually hunt and deal with low rank monsters occasionally, because you could get some kind of reward or something of value from it. That also ties in with my desire to have things have some kind of expiration or use it or lose it kind of aspect to them. 2. Skills should be present from the beginning, divided internally into categories such as playstyle changing skills, playstyle changing skills, statistical skills, i.e. damage up or defense up, and unique skills of some variation, like the Saragios's dodge rolling sharpens your weapon or refills ammo. I guess you could make an argument that's playstyle changing, but I think that falls better under unique. Playstyle changing skills should be available from the beginning at their highest level so players can find, experiment, and play how they like from the beginning. They should also be numerous enough to leave the average player something to come back to later on, which I believe we have enough in the game already in that aspect so that you can come back and find something else interesting to create for a playstyle or a build. Sorry about that. Statistical skills and unique skills should be harder to get, possibly tied to endgame content or endgame upgrades of monster bits and stuff. Personally, nothing feels worse to me than finally getting guard up or evade extender maxed out after you've cleared most of the game. Whether that's through not paying attention to what you need to go make or get, or if that's just because it's not available at all until you're most of the way through the game. It doesn't feel good. You could make the argument that that's for balance purposes. The developers did that intentionally because having that skill maxed out would be unfair by that point of the game, but I don't believe that's the case. I don't think they designed it in that way at all. I think they just had to put the skill somewhere and they just plunked them along a path, and said, "Oh, that works." Skills and skill slots could be made to be unlockable through leveling up the armor and upgrading it, giving you the choice between X amount of leveled slots or X amount of leveled skills. A similar system exists via the Rampage weapon alterations already, and this could also make it so that every other upgrade you get gives you these options, and the in-between upgrade improves the defensive stats. That would be a good use of that system, I believe, but I have some notes in the back of this page that I'll come up to here in a minute. Defensive and quality of life skills are restricted to armor, whereas offensive skills are restricted to the weapons and the monster bits used to make said weapons. This would mean weapons need more slots, and they also need more skills assigned as well. Preferably those that reflect the monster the weapon is from. So if you're making something from a Rathalos, that the skills assigned to that weapon should have some kind of correlation to Rathalos, whether that's just attack up or that's I don't know, the rage mechanic where when the monster's in rage you get bonus damage or something, something that reflects that monster's identity. Uh, each armor piece could be given a pool of skills to select from, depending on its level, and can also use so many identical to the current Palico or Palamute system that we have in Monster Hunter Rouse, or the Prowler system from GU Double Cross. These skills can be swapped out like decorations, but occupy a preloaded slot. So you would essentially have an A or B build starting point. So you got a pool of skills, and you could build towards path A or build towards path B, or do maybe path C, which is a mixture of both, just to get the bits you want, but then you're going to have to build upon that to max that out. Maybe it'd be a little more difficult, but more beneficial in select cases. And then, of course, cosmetic variants are craftable from the beginning or as a reward for specific quests if we can't have it from the start. I'm fine with having some special rewards for special quests for when it comes to cosmetics. But I really, really want cosmetic variants to be available from the beginning. So the second you find a monster and you fight him and you think his armor's badass, but you don't like the skills or they don't work for your weapon, you should be able to craft them. And I also want the return of all the gunner variations and all the other armor variations for all the monsters. I want all 50 variations of Rathian armor because they all are just beautiful and I just love them. And Rathian's got my favorite armor designs in the game. And I want all of them all the time. And I want to be able to switch between them easily. Also, I would like negative skills to return, and they need to be used to provide interesting build opportunities or as a limiter for the stronger gear so that the weaker monster's gear isn't always outclassed. This is really important for balance because currently we have an issue where once you get the big baddie monster at the end of the game, you don't want to use any other armor sets because its armor set is going to be the best at everything and anything, just about. Not necessarily true for every case, but the general case, it is the absolute best armor to use, which is a shame. I would love to be able to use my Arzuros armor even into the end of the game because it has a special skill set up or whatever that is useful because the end game armor maybe has so many negative skills that it's risky to run in certain situations. That would be wonderful. And this would also allow for a more natural progression into the skill system and mechanics than how they are currently drip-fed through high rank and then just thrown at you in G rank or master rank. This would not eliminate mix sets from the game either, although it could be designed in a way to do that if that is the direction desired. I kind of personally hope they don't do that because if you're going to have cosmetic layers anyways, then who cares? In regards to skills, it may be too much of an aside to bring up here, though I'd like to have the skills that influence things like critical hit rate and damage in general be removed, or restricted to the weapons only, as I mentioned. I personally prefer these skills to be limited to things that change the way you play, or give different options, even potentially limiting options, rather than being simple numerical changes. It just doesn't feel good to me to have just a ton of gigantic numerical changes. It doesn't feel like progression. It just feels like feels like a difficulty slider. You're just putting the game on easy mode all of a sudden. I like the monster, even in the beginning monster, even at the end of the game, to still feel like a challenge if you're snoozing on him and you're not paying adequate attention to what he can do. So I guess I should move on to my notes in the back, because there's a lot of them. Give me a second. So, it still is an incomplete thought or an incomplete idea, but for the armor system, I would suggest that maybe it's worth considering we have a complete start from scratch rather than a diversion of our current system or a fix of the current system. So if I break it down into the three simplest components, I would say 1, cosmetics as rewards or craftable from monster-based bits. Number 2, armor itself has no cosmetic layer. So instead the player buys a base armor and fuses or upgrades with various qualities and types of monster bits in order to build the desired armor, defense stats, and skills from that desired monsters that they're using to build it towards that. So if you want to increase that armor's lightning defense, you need to build it with lightning monster parts. If you want to increase that armor's fire defense, you got to start using something like Rathian or Rathalos parts, something along those lines. And of course, depending on the quality of the monster and its own affinity towards those elements and defense points, that'll change the values that you receive by using those points. This would also make it so, I guess theoretically, you could botch an armor and have to sell it, but yeah, that's fine, I suppose. It gives you a reason to hunt monsters and use their monster pieces rather than hoarding thousands of them. And if anyone's confused or wondering about having an armor have no cosmetic layer, I would just simply have all armor start out as whatever that game's base armor design is. So for Rise, it'd be the Chimera armor set, or for World, it would be the leather armor set or the chainmail armor set, whichever one it was. I think you had either one you could use, and that would be your base armor design. And you build all the defense and skills and all the stats on using monster pieces, and then you individually select cosmetic pieces to layer on top of that armor piece. 3, all skills that change how you play are available from the beginning, as I said earlier, but it would be much, much, much cheaper to grind the monster parts to make it. So while you could go to the blacksmith and just buy the piece that gives you Evade Extender 3, or buy all the pieces you need to make Evade Extender 3 or Guard Up, it would be significantly cheaper and significantly more time efficient to just go into the game and hunt the monster required for those pieces if he's available to you already. It should be quite expensive to do that without the monster being available. Once the monster's available, maybe the price could decrease, because now that part isn't in high demand, so it's not incredibly valuable to the blacksmith anymore. He can make them whenever. Essentially, this means rare monster bits will make your armor stronger and gives more skills and more slots. And this would also mean that they could potentially give you more negative skills or more negative attributes towards defense. That would be really great for balance. So you could build an armor with a lot of low tier, medium tier monsters and have wonderful defense, flat across the board, good against everything. It's a jack of all trades armor, and it has enough slots to have a comfy build for whatever your playstyle is. Maybe it's not maxed out and everything, but it gets the job done. But then you get into more high tier monsters, like you're fighting more Rajangs and Kirin, and what's another good lightning monster? Astalos. So you're fighting more Astaloses and Rajangs and Kirin, and you take all their parts and you make a really badass lightning defense and lightning attack type set. But because of those monsters' weaknesses, maybe you get a bunch of negative skills from them that you got to balance out, or you get really, really low defense stat and another element, or just an overall not as high defense stat as what you could have had otherwise. And so that would be a great way of planning out what you use and how you use it. And it would be also beneficial, I think, if there was a way for you to kind of revert to previous states of that armor, just for ease of use and just to avoid frustration where a player feels like they built themselves into a hole they can't get out of. But if they're going to do that, maybe they could provide a base armor upgrade level. So like maybe the base armor from high rank or the base armor from G rank is just a tier above the low rank version that you start with. So that way if you do got to go back, it doesn't feel as horrible to rebuild a new armor set, because you can start from a higher layer already, a higher tier. I wasn't sure how that would be balanced. It kind of feels counterintuitive to the system as a whole. But like I said, it's like an incomplete idea. I haven't worked out any of the kinks in it in my own head. Teamwork. All right. So, currently, co-op is missing a crucial element of the teamwork equation. And that would be the work part. So, most of the time, working with other players, unless they are known friends who you've agreed upon a set of rules with, kind of just feels like you're fighting a monster with some sort of attention disorder. I find I'm paying the cost of an occasional group heal or stagger from friendly fire, the light bowgun. It's always a light bowgun. It's always a light bowgun, in exchange for increased damage, which is debatable benefit due to group scaling. So, in modern games, you could argue that having more people and doing co-op is not really beneficial. So that's a fair argument. I don't know. I really like the whole group scaling concept, but at the same time, when I go back and play other games, it does feel more rewarding to play in multiplayer because you know that everybody's contributing and helping. So that's I don't know how I feel about that. Um, but currently, the only real penalty for striking a teammate is an annoying stagger or CC effect that light bowguns always cause to you, like 99% of the time, whenever they do anything. Just fucking light bowguns. Ugh. This should absolutely be changed. I mean, we could just get rid of the light bowgun. That'd be a sufficient enough change for me, but I'm not sure exactly what would be the best solution other than getting rid of the light bowgun, but I believe the new visual effects in Rise to be an attempt by the developers to remedy this. I could be horribly wrong, but I do believe that was part of it. Because when you have so many particle effects flying around, you can't really see what's going on, and you're more likely to kind of back off for a second. You could possibly have attacks that hit a teammate either deal damage to the player that did the attack, not the player that received it, or severely degrade their weapon sharpness or cause their bowgun to jam, or if it's a light bowgun, you just cause the bowgun to explode and they have to run back to camp or something. I don't know. uh, but I'm really not sure about the value of this until it's tested, and I don't know how. I don't know how you would balance that. What would feel fair and what would feel unfair in that situation. But I also wouldn't mind just seeing like maybe the player that struck the teammate get forced into an apology animation. So they're still walking or running, but now they can't do anything for a couple seconds because their character is trying to bow politely or shake his head and wave his hand, say sorry or something. Um, this would also mean, though, that if you're reworking the stagger system or this player interaction system with your attacks, that healing a teammate or status attack from a status attack like stun would require a different action. You can't come up and whack your teammate anymore because you could potentially cause your weapon to break down into red sharpness. Um, Maybe have it be sheathing your weapon first and then having the interaction button be pressed. That would be a good option. But something like the snowball status, that's just too adorable. I think we should still be able to smack the snowball off people. I just like that too much. It's just fun. Or we could return the kick and then kick people. That'd be great too. I like kicking people in the head when they're sleeping on the ground. It's fun. Well, this is allegorical at best. When my friends and I play, we sometimes do so with some light framework in place, more or less pretending to fill a specific role, as more than not, you can't actually perform any role any better than any other member in co-op in modern games. Uh, unless you build wide range and free meal for eating and stuff your pockets with all the healing items, but even then, everyone could just teleport back to camp in a second and restock, so... But we impose a death rule, meaning fainting during a quest makes you a spectator only. So for the duration of that quest, you haven't tried this, just for the duration of that quest, of course, And if you haven't tried this, I do highly recommend it for close friend play sessions. It is incredibly fun. It leads to a lot of smack talking, though, so you're going to be careful about that. Um, but the primary issue with these self-imposed rules is that they are indeed just self-imposed rules. But, if you're willing to give them a shot, I'd say give them a shot. I also do recommend weapon roulette so long as you take light bowgun off of the weapon roulette, because no one should ever be exposed to the light bowgun. It's like a war crime, in my opinion. And I'd also like to see more importance not only on the value or variety of interactions that a player and his weapon and items have, but on the interactions with other hunters as well. It would be fantastic if you had some kind of value placed on your ability to utilize an opening that another weapon provides, or utilize, I don't know, the lance's guarding ability as a longsword player, or utilize the heavy bowgun's artillery blasts as a lance user. That'd be kind of cool. Like you hunker down and the monster gets hit by the artillery, and then you get an opening to do extra damage because the artillery shell hit the monster somewhere or something. That would be cool. Or maybe bring in effects where certain monsters can cause other, or certain monsters, wow, certain weapons can cause weak points on monsters to change for a weapon. So if you're using the lance and you keep poking the monster in the face, maybe his head previously was not a weak point to heavy bow guns or bows, but now because you poked him so many times with the lance, it is now a weak point to heavy bow guns and bows. Something like that would be really cool to see, but I don't know how they balance it with the current systems that we already have that do similar things, so it's a little difficult to say. Animation, physics, and intention. So this may be difficult for me to elaborate on since I'm not a game developer and I don't really know the terminology, but I'm assuming most people listening to this aren't either, so I guess it's a moot point. In the Monster Hunter games, we have a simulated motion value. It's meant to give us a sense of weight, and since I realize we can't actually operate off physics calculations in a video game, maybe one day we can. I think the system is quite good, but there's plenty of room for debate of the fine points of the system. And I think my biggest debate over how the system works would be animation canceling. As I mentioned it briefly earlier, and I should do a better explanation, I think, now. So, in our case, this is usually dodging to cut an animation short. I believe this to be an example of very poor design. The commitment to an animation is meant to be there for balance. If it is allowed or expected for the player to skip/cut the animation, then that balance is disturbed. Unfortunately, this type of animation canceling has become so accepted that it is balanced around, rather than being revised itself. I would propose that animations be fine-tuned to eliminate dead time or self-inflicted crowd control, as much as possible, unless it is an intended consequence where the self-inflicted crowd control is the trade-off for the potential reward. The perfect examples of this are the EI Slash, Dual Blade Demon Dance, Hunting Horn Recital, or the Heavy Bowguns counter from Rise. If there is a way to give the player more agency over their avatar, and thus more intentional control of their actions, I believe this would be the path forward for the series, provided that the path does not create an overly complex control system. Well, not a system I've used often, but something I'd love to see used is directional input for attacks via the right thumbstick, allowing better reach and more agency, as it can be frustrating that you just can't hit the part you're aiming for sometimes. This will require combo chains to be reworked through the system to avoid confusion, however, as well as the primary attack buttons being remapped to the triggers as well. We'll probably never ever see this, I'm sure, but this is one potential way to do it. As I had mentioned previously, I would remap these controls in this manner. So when your weapon is sheathed, the right stick is the camera. All's normal, all's well. Once your weapon is unsheathed, the right stick is the camera. However, if you are pressing in the right stick plus the shoulder button, that would be your equivalent of a directional light attack. If you are pressing the right stick and the trigger, that would be the equivalent of a directional heavy attack. And we can make our left trigger the block or the special action key. And of course, this would require a considerable amount of animations per weapon, so that may be a primary reason why it would be undesirable from a designer standpoint. And then here's some points I know for a fact I've mentioned. Well, everything I've said up to this point in this section I've mentioned before, but these are points I'd really like to state again before the video is ending here, because I got one page left. Hey, we're almost done. So, point number one is that shields should receive collision physics and values in association, and better physics all around for shields. 2. Monsters should react appropriately to attacks from the player, provided they hit a weak spot. Possible exception for bouncing off of monsters' armor. I don't feel like I just spent 20 minutes pulverizing the monster for them to give me like, oh, sorry, I didn't see you there. I really don't like that feeling. It's just, it feels weird. So specifically, this is an issue with the dual blades in something like Rise, where I feel like I've been just wailing on the monster, and they just kind of turn around like, oh, hey, I didn't know you were behind me. And number 3, I want fall damage. I feel incredibly strong about this, especially if we're going to maintain a lot of the mechanics that we've gained in Rise in future games. we need to have fall damage come into play. That would be phenomenal. Maybe a lot of these mechanics and designs that have been implemented with Rise will fall away when the next game comes in the series. I wouldn't mind that. I can't say that it's a improvement, but maybe a lateral move. But regardless, I would like fall damage. Even if we have a return to nice, wide open arena-like spaces, I would want fall damage to return. I really would appreciate that. And I love the wide open spaces too. I'd like to see that come back. Number 4, monster damage to be better tuned per attack, or to the same equations the hunter's motion values follow. It always confuses me when a monster kind of gently taps me on the shoulder and I lose half my health, and then tries to bite my head off and I barely have a scratch. I can't think of a great example of this off the top of my head, but there's a lot of them. I've had a lot of times where like I've been bit by a Rathian, for example, or something, and I didn't take all that much damage, but then the Rathian walking past me and clipping my toe with its big toenail is enough to take out a third of my health or something weird like that. In that case, it's usually something like a gold Rathian or something. It's just the hitboxes are a little wonky and the motion value per part of the body that hits you is weird. I would love for that to be receive a whole lot more detail. And number 5, any possible improvements that they can make to the monster AI would be welcomed and wanted. And that's it. That's more or less it. My last section here is coming up in a few seconds. So, this is actually my second to last segment, to be honest, but games and spin-offs. I have my suspicions that developers have similar plans in mind as what I'm about to propose, but it is indeed something I'm very much hopeful for and would like to voice my thought on. So, number 1, I would want a Monster Hunter game as a service. Essentially, the return of Frontier, but with even more care and love than even that service had. This entry into the franchise could live on a 5 to 10 year life cycle, and it could change according to the advancements of the tech and the franchise as a whole, hopefully avoiding god-awful power creep like Frontier had in its later days. Number 2, a traditional buy-at-once Monster Hunter release. This would be what we have had with the Portable series and with World/Iceborne. However, I would say the Ultimate or Expansion editions are completely unnecessary and should be avoided. This entry in the series would be meant to be an exploration of mechanics, stories, and anything else the developers can think of while still being Monster Hunter. They are meant to get players' feet wet and interested in the games as a service side of the franchise, assuming that greed doesn't sink that ship in some kind of horrible fashion, and to provide experiences that the live service cannot for whatever reason that may be. The reason why I don't want an Ultimate Edition is because I want the game to be released as a complete game. I don't want it to be updated several times after it's been released. I want it to come out as a physical copy that I could buy and play and enjoy on my own wherever and however I want. 3 is spin-offs of any kind, such as the Stories games or any and all of the smartphone games, although I think there's only one of them that I thought was worth any time, even though it was a gacha nightmare with, smartphone game mechanics that just immediately made me lose interest. I didn't even finish the tutorial. That's how frustrating they were. But it had some potential. It had a story that looked interesting. The character design was nice. It seemed like they went to great lengths to adapt the Monster Hunter mentality to that game. Anyways, these are, again, a place for the developers to explore the world of Monster Hunter ideas and mechanics that otherwise wouldn't fit into the series neatly. I, for one, am really hoping we receive a village, guild, or environment management and defense game based on what we've seen from Rise's Rampage mode and other, siege missions that we've had in previous games. Although I'd be eating those words if it was completely as unpolished and messy as the Rampage mode received in Rises. I didn't mention that anywhere here in my whole shindig here because it was just so awful. I could spend 3 hours talking about it alone. So, and it was just a shame because I like the idea. I want that to be a thing in the series. It's a wonderful idea, great premise. It just was a hard flop. And the developers knew it too. That's why it's not continuing on to Sunbreak. So, yeah, those are my 3 things. I would like spin-offs for the game developers to explore fun and neat ideas like village or guild management or environment management, please. That'd be so cool. Maybe a defense-based game. 2, a traditional buy it once, got it, play it, do whatever, and a game as a service. All right, you guys made it. So this is my last section. I promise it's going to be a nice, quick, short, easy, to the point one. So this section is fun and what everyone can agree on.